Welcome to the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. I'm your host, Robin L. Owens, PhD, and this is where we dive in each week to give advice, tools, and tips for high-achieving, purpose-minded women who've written nonfiction books and want to amplify their message beyond the book. I'm a college professor, and when I'm not doing that, I am speaking, coaching, mentoring, and teaching high-achieving women who have written books how to use their books to make a bigger difference, have more impact, and purpose. Okay, let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. I'm so glad you're here and you take time to listen into the podcast. I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate you. And because you listen in, you help the podcast get ranked in the top 5% of all podcasts globally, according to the search engine Listen Notes. So thank you for doing that. Really appreciate you. All right. Now today, I'm talking with Dr. Jeanne Porter King. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Jeanne. Jeanne Porter King, PhD, is an author, consultant, pastor, and leadership coach specializing in women's leadership. She's the founder and president of Porter Group, Inc., a consulting company focused on leadership development. She is passionate about developing both existing and emerging leaders. Her goal is to encourage and empower more Black women to lead well. And that's why she wrote and published her newest book, Leading Well, a Black Woman's Guide to Holistic Barrier-Breaking Leadership. I can't wait for everybody to get this book. Welcome, Dr. Jeanne Porter King.
Robin, Dr. Robin, it is always so good to talk with you. And thank you again for an invitation to be on your popular podcast talking about my new book. So thank you for the invitation.
It's so good to have you back. You have one of the rare distinctions of our guests to be a returnee. And so I'm glad you're here. Yes, you are definitely a friend of the show. So come back anytime you want.
Awesome. And congratulations on in the top 5% of podcasts globally. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So you heard me just read your official bio, but why don't you tell people in your own words about who you are and what you do?
Excellent question. I am a woman who is passionate about developing other people, primarily for leadership. I have been a leadership and organizational development consultant for 30 years. And more recently, I became a board certified coach in the last 5 to 7 years and am transitioning. I still maintain corporate consulting clients, which means I do more large scale either training programs or strategic initiatives to help companies. And I'm doing far more with coaching leaders, especially women and especially Black women leaders, around their leadership skills, competencies, or gifts, and just being able to help them flow in their leadership. I am married. And I didn't have any children, but I have lots of godchildren. And I'm the number one auntie for my nieces and nephews, and definitely believe into pouring into that next generation.
Yes, I could relate to that because, like you, I don't have children, but I one of my greatest joys is having convinced my niece and nephews that I am the cool aunt.
I am ditto for me. I'm a former professor. I know you're still teaching. I'm a former professor. And I felt called. We'll talk a bit about vocational courage and vocational clarity and vocational creativity in a moment. But I felt called to leave academia, start a business, and I combine that with ministry. I do serve, in addition to running these businesses or this business, I serve as executive pastor at the church that my husband is senior pastor at. So I get lots of leadership practice these days.
Yes, and you wear many hats and you wear them well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
All right. So you mentioned about vocation and mentioned the book. So let's start talking about the book. All right, I read the title of the book, but Leading Well. But tell us again, just say the whole title and then the main premise of the book. What's the main idea? What did you want to get across?
Okay. Leading Well, a Black woman's guide to holistic, barrier breaking leadership. Leading well, of course, is about leading effectively, but it's also about leading from a well of wholeness, peace, and purpose. And as many coaches, we coach people to lead from the inside out. Will help people really talk about and shift their mindsets and develop the frame of thinking that can help them reach their goals. And I take it a slightly different bent. And the story, the theological or biblical story that undergirds the lessons is the story of the woman at the well. And Jesus promised her, I would be in you a well of living water springing up into everlasting life. And so there we have this image of this vibrancy that is a well of wholeness, a well of peace, a well of love that flows from us. And that is the leading well also. So it's not just about leading effectively, which it is, but it's also leading from this place that allows us to maintain a sense of wholeness, well-being. Because as women, and I did center Black women in this book, because part of it is my story, but it's also because we're often left out of the dominant narrative on leadership. So I centered us. The message is relevant and pertinent to all people, but I wanted particularly to provide even a healing message, a message of wholeness for women who have most likely faced barriers and biases as I have, and as people who look like me have. And I wanted them to know there's some solutions, that we don't have to not lead. We're called to lead and make a difference wherever we are. And we do face microaggressions and barriers and biases and stereotypes and downright discrimination. And as a consultant, I work with companies to address those things structurally. But this message is individual coaching, ministry, if you will, that says, here's what individuals can do while we're still working on the systems.
Ah, yes, I can hear the power and the passion as you're sharing that. Now let's go back to little Jeanne, or maybe not little Jeanne, well before you were Dr. Jeanne. Were you always this? Did you have, because we were talking early on when we talked about your introduction, how you have the different leadership roles. Now were you little Jeanne? Were you the little leader? Was there
You
something
know,
in you early on that now is expressing here today?
I'm a firm believer that those gifts and graces show up very early on, and they did for me in a number of ways. Number one, I'm the eldest of three. And so I have that firstborn syndrome that, yes, I'm in charge of the younger kids, right? But I also was raised by parents that brought two things to me. My father was very strong and active in the community, social activist, gravitated into management and the manufacturing. I grew up in basically the Rust Belt of Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. So manufacturing organizations is where we cut our teeth. And I tease and say sometimes that I think my dad raised me as his firstborn son. And I don't mean in terms of sports, but the critical thinking. He would test me and ask me questions around cultural situations and would want to know how I would think through them or problem solve. And he cultivated in me critical thinking, strategic thinking, when I didn't even know that's what he was doing. But it also cultivated a confidence that probably served as a foundation to lead. And so I tell everyone the voice you hear in me is the voice that my father cultivated. My mother, on the other hand, was quiet, shy, life of the party in her own quiet way. She cultivated within me a care and a caring that I trust that it comes through, that I can be both take charge and take care, and can bring that out in leadership. So yeah, along the way, I began to in church. Many of us get our first leadership experiences in church, and that was the same with me as a teenager in youth ministry. As a young adult, I was part of a church, parachurch organization that cultivated leadership skills in young people, and I gravitated to that and served in numerous leadership roles and was often one of the few women who actually gravitated to the senior most level role. So yes, that was very early on. So thank you for making that connection.
You were a leader already. Just came here as a leader. Now you're spreading it. Okay, so now let's hear more about the idea of I heard in the title leading well, and then the story, the woman at the well. And so tell us about what you mean, this what you're thinking about well.
Yeah. So, in the introductory chapters, I invite your readers to get the book, and we give the more formal definition of leading well, both those two dimensions. But it really is also this notion of that well that is within us. And when I looked at wellness framework and went and researched wellness dimensions, many of the framework talk about 6, 9, or 12 different dimensions like emotional well-being, mental, physical, occupational, or vocational. And spirituality is one of the 6, 9, or 12. For me, I wanted, especially for Black women, to honor our cultural heritage in which spirituality has been so phenomenally critical. And so, with that, I frame it that the spiritual dimension, the spiritual well from which we draw, is core and center. And again, it aligns with the message of Jesus of that well of living water that's within you. The living water we know is the Holy Spirit. And so from that well, then flows what we need for the other dimension. So there's a model in the book in which that well is the center, then it's our mind, body, and spirit, soul, and body, and then these other 9 dimensions. There's 2 other dimensions that I added to this framework that most of the traditional wellness models don't include. For Black women, I think it's absolutely critical that our sense of self, I call it our personal identity, has to be well, has to be whole. We face so much trauma around our very being. I share the story in the book that I, like you, have locked. I just got them tightened on Monday, and we were trying to remember, when did you start your lock journey? But up to then, I was relaxing or sometimes weaving. And as I got older, my hair was getting thinner. And I said, no, wait, time out. I want to be able to wear my hair in its natural state. But I was a corporate consultant. And back when I was thinking about doing this wasn't necessarily popular, right? Because there was a stigma around how we wore our hair. And so I talk about in the book, number one, actually going to my top client. It was probably 7, 8 years ago, because I started with kinky twists and extensions first, telling her I was about to do this. And it appalls me now that I felt I needed to get permission. I wasn't really getting permission, but I wanted to make sure the company that was 65 to 70% of my revenue did not all of a sudden cast me aside and determine that my competence was now tied up in the curl or kinky pattern of my hair. And I say that to say there's all types, from skin tone, eye color, body shape. We are judged in so many ways that have bearing, number one, on how we see ourselves and how we sometimes try to assimilate and fit in so we can be seen as worthy of leadership or the performance standards of others. And so one of the core elements in this book is one of the dimensions of well-being has to be how we see ourselves. And I have an entire chapter that affirms who we are as Black women, created in the image of God, loved by God, and called to lead and empowered to lead wherever God so chooses. So that's an example of, and even my own story of this came to be to really help others. When we talk about showing up wholly, being whole, WHOLE, and having a holistic approach to leadership, it means I need to be comfortable in my own skin. And I don't need to have self-doubt because someone else is going to judge me based on skin tone, size of lips, hair, or whatever. My competence and my experiences, should not be dinged because of their biases.
Yeah. So how did it go when you talked to her or him or her about when you started to change your hair? How did that all turn out?
It was a
Because
her,
you just left us
and
hanging there. You just put it out there and then you just
my
left us
bad,
hanging.
my bad. We had actually a very good conversation. And she teased and said, "Oh, I imagine on the weekends it's going to be even funner." Or, I think she called her wild at the time. And the important thing is we had a very transparent conversation. And because I was also doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work with this particular company, I also positioned it as a DEI issue. That if we're going to create and cultivate inclusive cultures and workplaces, then these are the issues that managers and leaders have to deal with. So that was number one. It was a very empowering and enlightening conversation, mutually supportive. The other thing, what was ironic, it was probably 4 months, maybe a year later, that one meeting she came to pretty late. We were having lunch and she was running late, and I noticed her hair was that straight. I hadn't ever seen it that straight. She's a white woman. She was a Jewish white woman. And what I didn't know, she says, "Oh, you just don't understand. My hair gets very thick and I have to straighten it." So, in many ways, and I think it was a permanent type straightening. In many ways, I think she could empathize with me when I went to her. So, in that sense, I'm grateful that I had someone who was sensitive, but I didn't find out about that sensitivity until later. We became such good friends. She shared with me her own hair struggle.
Yes, I love that. I love that. You just never know. You just never know. Okay, so now let's talk about the book and the journey because I'm imagining that lots of women who are listening who are consultants and authors have written the book, and it sounds like at the time people will be hearing this, you'll be just bringing this book out into the world after kind of talking about it and promoting it leading up to this moment or this time. So, what would you say has been your greatest joy in getting this message out so far?
Um, the greatest joy has been the support system in writing the book that I felt called to write. I have been doing leadership development for 25, 30 years. I have another book out that is far more business oriented, but to integrate the cultural and the spiritual and the professional leadership together and to center Black women, oh, that has been such a delight. I had a number of publishers and agents that were interested. And one in particular, a couple of them said, "Oh, well, this is good, but there's a couple of issues. Leadership books are hard to sell. So I want your listeners to go buy this book because we want to prove them wrong." And then a niche of women's leadership and now Black women's leadership. Oh, it might be a little hard to sell. But then also, it's such a niche with Black women. Can you broaden the message so that you can at least speak to the people? They called it those who will be looking over my shoulder, white women, and then men, white men, and men of color. And I said, well, I suppose I can, and I would have. But I ended up meeting and connecting with this agent, Javon Bolden of Embolden Media Group. And when she read the proposal, she said, "Oh, this is it. This is a book whose time has come. And I don't want you to change it at all." Because I began to talk to her about what the other publishers and agents were saying. And she sold it. And the scripture that I was standing on is the Lord gave the word, and great is the company of women who published it. That's out of Psalm 68:11. And don't you know the Lord brought that a woman agent, the acquiring editor for this publisher was a woman, the editors, um, the team. And I said, this is what I'm supposed to bring into the world at this time. And if you don't mind, I know my stories can get a little long, but there's also a couple other reasons that this has been such a delight, a joy, but also a humbling experience. I have written on leadership. I've always integrated my faith and spirituality to anything that I do. I may not have always used the God language, the Holy Spirit language, but you could see it in anything, any training, anything that I've written. It often came out in the moral or ethical, dimensions for leaders. But in this particular case, what launched me into focusing on this message, especially for Black women, two of my closest friends died at very premature ages, 1 month apart.
Oh,
I
no.
remember the day that my good friend called me. I was teaching a class at the local seminary. I'm an adjunct professor there, teaching a class. And she said, Jeanne, I have something to tell you. My class was on break for dinner. It was an intensive seminary graduate level class. So they were on break for dinner. We were working into the evening. And it was a rare cancer, late stage. And we had taught together at the university. We were just close. And that was a September call, end of September call. By February, doctor, she had passed. And we talked periodically. I helped walk her through. I remember one time she called and I drove up and down Stony Island in Chicago, just listening, being present, right? In that same period, another good friend that we had actually done our doctorates at the same time, two different schools in Ohio. We supported each other. She brought me in to do work at her university. She was in administration. I brought her in to do work. And a similar rare cancer. And within a month of my other friend, she passed. And that was a wake-up call for me. Because we often say, and we take pride in our culture of saying, Black don't crack, right? I'm looking at you and your beautiful complexion, and people can't guess my age. Clairol helps a little, but, but the reality is Black does crack from the inside out. And because of the stress and stressors that we are under, I think that we lead against such opposition that our bodies pay the toll for it. And this was a wake-up call for me. I write about each of them. Their stories are in the book, and they did stellar things, and they left a great legacy. But it was a wake-up call for me to say, how am I leading, and how am I helping others to lead? Do you continue on this grind of taking pride in traveling as a consultant and, the push, developing this program, that program? Or do you step back and really begin to assess, where are we? Where am I? And help others to assess where we are and how do we lead well, lead differently? That there is this, we care as Black women for so many people, but often we don't care for ourselves. Yeah. And I now call this whole movement, this Leading Well movement, is I'm trying to help more of us transition from leading like super women to leading like well women.
Yes, well women. We all want to be well women. And I can understand, I can relate, and I'm sorry to hear that about your friends. And I could relate to when those life situations happen and they lead us, no pun intended, lead us
right.
another direction, because that happened to me with this work that I'm doing now. Was when in 2018, my brother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at the beginning of the year. And before winter struck during fall, he was gone. So just in that short amount of time. And I thought, he was gracious through it all, and just a person who loved life, that turned his life around and just was enjoying his life. And so once I got past the initial grief after the funeral and all that, and I said, he really loved life, and now he's not here to be able to engage in it. I'm still here. What have I been doing that am not fully living into my life? And I had been talking about doing some of the work I'm doing now, writing a book, focusing on purpose, and doing all the things. Yet, because I was working full time, justifiably working full time and saying, I don't have time. But I thought, well, you can still make some time around this. And so it was all the impetus was this, to live more fully into my life after losing. So I certainly understand how those things lead us on a different path.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about your brother, but do understand, again, that impetus.
Yeah.
For you birthed leading with purpose, or leadership purpose, through this.
Yeah.
Through that experience. So we're grateful for the voice you have and those you bring together to help us all lead better.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you for saying that. And you've been so generous with your time and your offering. Is there anything that you can lead as a word of advice for women who have, because this is now your second book, at least your second book, right?
It's the seventh.
The seventh. Okay. So I had a feeling there might be. So you have absolutely something to share with a woman consultant. Her book is out there in the world, and it's not always the easiest thing to do. To kind of, you're really passionate about the message. Usually, when people write the book, it's because it's important to them. It's something from their
Hmm.
heart and their soul that they want to get out there. And then there's the
Hmm.
challenges of getting it out there. So with all that in mind, with that going on with them, what's something, a word of advice or a tip or encouragement you can share with them?
Yes, for your listeners, I would want them, first of all, the book is appropriate, applicable to all people. And I know you have a diverse array of listeners. It is a message about leading from the inside out, because I do believe we lead from who we are, but it is also a recalibration of our leadership. So, one of the first steps I talk about is reimagining what could be if we truly led from that place of the well. And from there, we affirm our identity so that no matter what the messages are around us, we're clear on who we are and we can show up authentically. We don't ignore the biases. So I give some strategies for addressing biases that women of color, particularly Black women, will face. And from there, we give ideas of how to create and carve out those possibilities, trusting our gut, not getting permission from others. And at some point, really beginning to see leadership as a calling. That vocation comes from the Latin vocare, which is the call. So when there's this voice you hear within, and I play on Parker Palmer's notion of vocation quite a bit in this book. But that's what I would want your listeners to hear, that they too have been called to make a difference. Leading and leadership becomes a framework or lens or matrix through which they live their lives. That we as Black women, particularly, lead and influence, whether we have a title or not. So we might as well do it in ways that are sustainable to us and that we are healthier and that we are integrating principles and practices of wellness into our leadership so that not only are we leading well, but we're helping others to do so also. And we're helping to cultivate these cultures that are better for all of us.
Yes. Well, Dr. Jeanne Porter King can't end it any better than that. All right. So I'm guessing there are people saying, where can I hear more? So how can they get in touch with you?
There's a couple of ways I would encourage them. They can get the book at any of their booksellers. This is airing the day after it's been launched. So it's out there on all of the booksellers. And if they go to my website, drjeanneporterking.com, they can also learn more about the book. They can sign up for my email list because I'm starting a Leading Well movement. So we're going to have a coaching program for experienced leaders and new leaders. There'll be two dimensions, a VIP version and then an entry level version for those who are just getting started. So if they want to sign up, do that. And I would invite them to follow me on Instagram because there I'm trying to post, I post inspirational messages around this leading well movement, if you will. So I would encourage them on Instagram. It's Dr. Jeanne Porter King, as is the website. And I'm on the other social sites also. LinkedIn, a number of professional women may want to follow me on LinkedIn, Dr. Jeanne Porter King. And then there's Facebook and also Twitter. So I would welcome them to follow me.
Okay. All right. So you heard that, everyone. Go ahead and grab the book and follow Dr. Jeanne. Dr. Jeanne, thank you for being here. Appreciate you for sharing your time today with us.
Thank you, Dr. Robin, and continued success for
Thank,
you.
thank you. Okay, everyone. And if you want to be in touch with me, I'd love to hear from you. Just send me a message. I'm on all the socials, but I'd love to hear you. Just what are you thinking about the podcast? What's a takeaway from today's episode or another episode? And I especially hang out at LinkedIn. So go on over and message me at LinkedIn at Robin L. Owens, PhD, at Robin L. Owens, PhD. And if you've written your book and it's not reaching as many people as you hoped, and you want to get it out there in a bigger way, and you've been thinking about creating a course, then I have a new training that will help you do that. Go over to createmasterfulcourses.com, createmasterfulcourses.com, and get my free training, and we'll get you on your way. And until next time, this is Dr. Robin. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. If you enjoyed it, head on over and rate and subscribe so you never miss an episode. New episodes drop every week, and I can't wait to hang out with you again soon. Meanwhile, this is Dr. Robin signing off. See you next time.